Supposedly it had always been this way, stretching way back to when my grandpa opened this place almost 97 years ago. I inherited it when he passed a decade or so ago, given that my father didn't want anything to do with the place, and since then I've made sure to diligently follow his final wish. He might have left me the theater, but there was one condition. Not that it'd be enforceable if I went against his wish, more about that later, but the condition was present nonetheless. Never, ever let the film stop running in screen 6. Now, I'd practically grown up in that theater, given it was a nice little hangout spot after closing time, but I never knew anything about the existence of a 6th screen. It had always been 5. Grandpa left that sentence, and a little picture guide to find the controls for that screen, as well as the security footage system for it. He also left a letter, only to be opened once I had been running the theater for long enough to understand the importance of screen 6. It baffled me at the time, but I kept that wish too, and tucked the letter away. He never told me where to find the screen itself, either. The first thing I did was check the cameras, only to find they showed nothing of interest. No moviegoers were present in this secret little screen, nor were any employees. The black and white footage from the vantage point of a camera positioned above the screen of a silent, empty room filled with rows and rows and endless rows of dusty chairs stared back at me. Somehow it was larger than all of our other screens. After unlocking the neat little contraption he described, I realized the system for that screen was digital. Strange, I mumbled, given the fact our theater was always quite proud of being the only film-only establishment in town. I suppose digital files make running the screen endlessly an easier task. Something jumped out at me, though. The digital file being used to loop over and over was just that, a singular file. It wasn't cycling through a library of movies. The same one was playing over and over. The file name, sacrifice.mxf. I've always been a curious person, and part of me wanted to resist. Some instinct was screaming at me to stop, but I couldn't. I had to take a glimpse at the little outdated screen synced up to the projector. It was grainy and degraded, footage that looked like it had been shot in the mid-20th century or so. A group of men dressed in black and women dressed in white circled a tree with interlocked hands. They looked like they were speaking, maybe singing. Regardless, there was no audio. They went round and round this great old tree for what felt like forever before stopping in their tracks and just standing there for a minute or two. The footage cut an unspecified amount of time forward to reveal their black and white garments blowing in the wind as they hung from various branches of the tree. All of them. It didn't matter that there wasn't any audio. I could feel the silence seeping out of that screen. Cut to black. Part of me was horrified, and another part retained some morbid sense of fascination with what I'd seen. I wasn't planning on going against Grandpa's wishes anyway, but at least I'd seen something that spooked me enough to justify the strangeness of it all. Was that the entire film that had been playing over and over for God knows how long? How was such a massive auditorium just hidden away somewhere? What the hell was that video? I needed to find out. God, I wish I hadn't, but I did. The next few weeks were spent meticulously researching everything I could possibly find about our little family-owned theater. My little theater. I spent hours on end in that projector room trying to make sense of what was being played. The footage described above wasn't alone, but remained similar to the others I've since seen. All feature large groups of people in what looks like pre-war Europe. 1930 or so is my best guess. They start off peaceful enough, almost joyous, but I've learned by now to reject the faux happiness depicted. It grabs a hold of you before the violent sacrifices that soon follow rip your heart out. Sometimes I wonder about the people shown. There are so many of them across the different short films, probably more than I've known in my entire lifetime. All of them met such a gruesome end. It might sound easy to throw away their collective existence as mere pixels on a screen, but I can't. The local newspaper allowed me access to their archive to find out a little more, and things began to tie themselves together. I had to sift through cardboard box after cardboard box to find what I'd been looking for, but I eventually did. Back in 1931, there had been an awful incident at our theater. At the time it was owned by Grandpa, and things were looking up given it was the only establishment of its kind in town. Unfortunately, something terrible was to happen soon. It was a cool October evening when local police were alerted to a disturbance down at the movie theater by terrified patrons. You see, back then there was a screen 6 nestled right next to screen 5. It was the focal selling point as a state-of-the-art screen showing only the finest films. Those in Screen 5 began to realize something was badly wrong when the sound of an incessantly crying and screaming child began to drown out the more pleasant sound of their film. The talkies, as films with spoken audio were known in their 1930s heyday, were a phenomenon, and it took a lot to distract those in Screen 5 from their entertainment. The child screamed for as long as it could until annoyance turned to worry, and eventually fear. By the time police swung open the double doors to Screen 6, the leather white seats were soaked in crimson red blood, and the patrons inside had long since taken their last breaths. Except one, still the child screamed. I've always been open-minded when it comes to the unseen, not a believer per se, but not dismissive of the idea. Things began to come into a clearer focus. Hundreds of people had sacrificed themselves in that screen all those years ago, and now the screen is forever condemned to forever playing films of similar occurrences. The two had to be connected. The letter. It was time to open the letter. I was convinced I satisfied Grandpa's requirement for doing so, and it would fill in the parts of this deranged story I was missing. I slipped the letter out of its glum, off-white envelope and began to read. To my beloved grandson, I know you probably know much more about the story of our little theater than you did when I left it to you. I'm sorry it took until we were separated for you to learn the truth, but it was something that had to be done. Those people that are in the films playing on Screen 6 were part of an ancient cult, the Men of Mephistopheles they called themselves. They would live in communes, and the peaceful images you've come to see are of their day-to-day lives, and as you have also come to see, they would eventually offer themselves en masse in blood sacrifices. One of these sacrifices happened to take place in Screen 6 of our theater, and once again I'm sure you have come to learn of this given you are reading this letter. The locations in which these sacrifices take place are forever bound to the souls lost there in some form or another. To illustrate, that great big tree in one of the films is now the site of countless suicides. Their crime, daring to walk where the Men of Mephistopheles once walked and where they left this earth. Our particular curse happens to be that Screen 6 began to be the site of similar suicides, and so did our other screens. We could never figure out why they weren't contained to the immediate site of the original sacrifice, but needed to find a way to stop them. Times were tough, and the money the theater brought in was important to all of our lives. An occultist suggested the endless film screening as a way to stem the flow, whilst we found a more permanent solution. But before long we realized it stopped the awful goings on entirely, so we let the films play, and then play some more. Screen 6 had originally been downstairs, since the building only allowed for that kind of space down there, so we turned it into a tomb. Maybe the misguided souls lost there found some peace in the dusty catacomb of a theater left behind. Now if you know the story of the sacrifice at our theater, you know there was a singular child who survived it all. That child, your father. I'm so sorry for keeping the truth locked away from you the way I did. You deserved to know whilst I was still there, with you. Please know I only ever had your best interests at heart. I love you always. Poppy, it's been a few weeks since I found out the truth about our small town theater. Sleeping has been difficult because of the endless nightmares, as has bothering to keep up maintenance of the place. Still, though, the film on Screen 6 plays,